Have you ever felt like an outsider? Like you walked into a room and the air just changed for us. For black men and women across this country, that feeling is a familiar companion. It's the silent judgment, the unspoken challenge, the weight of expectations laid upon you before you even say a word. But what if that quiet strength, that deep well of resilience you've cultivated, is exactly what makes you unshakable? What if the very thing they underestimate about you is your greatest power? Today we're sharing the story of Elijah Vance, a man who simply wanted to finish his lunch. What happened next wasn't just a fight. It was a profound lesson in the quiet power of standing your ground, a testament to the strength that lives in us all, especially when the world tries to tell you where you don't belong. This is a story about what happens when quiet strength meets loud arrogance, and why the calmest people are often the ones you should never test. The dusty ribbon of Highway 17 stretched endlessly shimmering under the Georgia sun. Most folks zipped past, heading for bigger towns and brighter lights, but Elijah Eli Vance wasn't most folks. His old faded pickup truck, a loyal companion through countless miles, rumbled along the engine, a steady, comforting purr. Eli wasn't in a hurry. He rarely was. His journey wasn't about the destination. It was about the path, the quiet solitude, and the stories whispered by the wind through his open window. He was a man shaped by purpose, a former Navy SEAL whose most intense battles were now fought in the stillness of his own mind. He sought peace, but peace, as he knew, often found him in the most unexpected of places. A flicker of neon, barely clinging to life, caught his eye. The Rusty Spoon Diner. The sign declared its letters half missing, half burnt out. It looked like a relic, a forgotten outpost where time had shrugged its shoulders and moved on. The gravel parking lot was sparse, a lone battered motorcycle glinting ominously near the entrance. Eli cut the engine, the sudden silence amplified by the distant buzz of unseen insects. He took a moment, letting his gaze sweep over the diner, noting the way the dusty glass reflected the harsh light, the way the few cars seemed to lean tiredly in the lot. It was the kind of place where strangers weren't always welcome, and Eli, with his calm demeanor and quiet strength, knew how to read the unspoken rules of a new territory. He stepped inside, and the bell above the door jangled, a surprisingly loud intrusion into the dim quiet. Every head in the diner turned. It wasn't the fleeting curiosity you get in a busy city. This was different. These were the kind of stares that lingered, assessing cautious heavy with an unspoken weight. Eli felt it immediately, a familiar discomfort, a subtle chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It's like walking into a room where everyone already knows the rules, the unwritten codes of belonging, but no one bothered to tell you. You just feel it, that prickle on the back of your neck that tells you you're an outsider, an unwelcome variable in a tightly controlled equation. For Eli, it wasn't fear. It was an old acquaintance. He'd lived a life where being other was often a prelude to conflict. At a large corner booth, a group of men sat draped in leather vests, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses even in the diner's dim light. The insignia on their vests, a clenched fist clutching a chain, marked them as the Iron Fists Motorcycle Club. Their boisterous laughter died the instant Eli entered, replaced by a collective silent glare that felt heavier than any sound. Unbothered Eli adjusted his baseball cap, kept his shoulders relaxed, and headed for a booth near the window. He always chose a seat facing an exit, an old habit that died harder than most. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with weary eyes, approached his table. Her pen tapped nervously against her notepad, a rhythmic tremor. "What can I get you, hun?" she asked, her voice flat, her eyes darting between Eli and the group of bikers. Eli's gaze followed hers briefly. He knew their presence. Their implicit threat was why her hand trembled slightly as she placed his coffee down. "Just a cheeseburger and fries," Eli replied softly, "and a coffee black." She scribbled it down without looking at him, her eyes fixed on the bikers, who were now watching Eli like a hawk circling its prey. One of them, a hulking figure with a thick graying beard and knuckles tattooed with crude symbols, leaned back in his chair. This was Blade, the leader. He spoke loud enough for the entire diner to hear his voice, a low, guttural rumble. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Lost your way, buddy. This ain't your usual stomping ground." A few low snickers rippled through the group. Eli didn't engage. He just sat, calm and still, tracing the rim of his coffee cup as if the room around him didn't exist. He'd learned a long time ago that true strength isn't about immediate aggression, but about unshakable composure under pressure. It's about controlling your internal world when your external world is chaos. The waitress returned with Eli's coffee, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on the table. Eli offered her a faint understanding smile and a soft, "Thank you." It wasn't her fight. She didn't need to feel guilty for walking away, and she did just that fast. Eli took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't need to look up to know all eyes were on him now. The room had taken sides without him saying a word. Outside, a truck rumbled past gravel crunching beneath its tires. Inside, the air thickened like the calm before a storm. The silence wouldn't last much longer, and Eli knew it. The tension in the diner felt like a held breath a moment stretched too thin. The bikers had stopped pretending. All eyes were locked on Eli, waiting for a response he didn't feel the need to give. This wasn't just about a seat in a diner. It was about a challenge, an unspoken test of boundaries that had little to do with where Eli chose to have lunch. "Maybe he's just shy," Blade sneered, his lips twisting into a smug, cruel grin. "Or maybe he's lost. Ain't much for his kind out here." A low, guttural laugh rolled through the iron fists, hitting Eli like a wave against rocks. The diner wasn't big, but in moments like this, it felt suffocating. Eli, however, took another slow sip of coffee unbothered, as though he hadn't heard them. He didn't flinch, didn't twitch. If anything, he looked bored. This wasn't just rudeness. It was a deliberate, veiled racial slur, a quiet poison seeping into the air. And for those who've faced such insidious microaggressions, it's a familiar, irritating hum, a constant reminder of being another. People often dismiss these comments thinking they're just words. But for those who face them daily, they're a subtle erosion, a chipping away at their peace, creating an environment of hostility without ever throwing a punch. His calm only made them angrier. The scrape of a chair echoed loud as Blade pushed away from the table. Boots thudded against the floor as he swaggered forward, his presence heavy, radiating a petty, entitled aggression. The other bikers sat back eager for a show. The waitress stood behind the counter, frozen, her eyes darting between Eli and the advancing biker. The entire diner had fallen into a hush, the kind of silence that screams louder than any shout. It was the uncomfortable quiet that often accompanies acts of prejudice, where fear or uncertainty traps onlookers, leaving them as unwilling spectators to an unfolding injustice. You wonder, why do people choose to watch rather than intervene? It's a mix of fear, perceived powerlessness, and the hope that someone else will step in. Blade stopped just beside Eli's booth, close enough that his leather vest reeked of sweat and cheap cigarettes. "Hey, I'm talking to you, boy!" He snarled the word, hitting the air like a slap. Sharp, cruel, deliberate. Eli didn't move, didn't look up. Instead, he set his coffee down gently on the saucer, the subtle clink almost imperceptible in the tense quiet. It wasn't a nervous gesture. It was the deliberate action of a warrior preparing for battle. "Something I can help you with," he said finally, his voice even measured. The question wasn't combative. If anything, it was polite. But the way he said it, soft, deliberate, stopped Blade for a beat. Blade narrowed his eyes. "You're sitting where you don't belong. Don't you know how things work around here?" Behind him, the other bikers snickered. One of them, a wiry man with stringy hair, called out, "Show him Blade. Teach him some manners." The bikers believed respect was earned through intimidation and force. Eli knew true respect came from integrity and control, not empty threats. He exhaled quietly, a breath barely noticeable, but it was there. "I'm just here for lunch, that's all." That calm set Blade off. He wanted a reaction, something to justify what came next. He slammed a fist on the table, rattling the salt shaker. "I don't think you heard me, friend." Eli's gaze lifted slowly, locking onto Blade's, and in that instant, something shifted. It wasn't aggression in Eli's eyes. It wasn't fear either. No. What Blade saw was stillness, the kind that doesn't break, doesn't move. It unsettled him, though he didn't show it. A beat passed. "Back off," Eli said quietly. Not a plea, not a threat, just a fact. Blade snorted, masking his discomfort with bravado. "Or what?" The diner went dead silent again. No one moved. Even the cook had stopped flipping burgers. Blade's patience snapped. "You're going to learn some respect today." He reached out to grab Eli by the collar, and Eli's hand moved quick as a snake. He caught Blade's wrist mid-air, his grip iron tight. The biker froze, startled. "Don't," Eli said softly, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge now, a warning. For a moment, Blade didn't know what to do. The other bikers were watching, goading him silently to act. He yanked his arm free with a jerk and stumbled back a step, snarling to save face. "Think you're tough, huh?" Blade spat, flexing his hand. "We'll see about that." He turned toward the others. "Get up, boys." Chairs scraped. The air thickened. The rest of the bikers, 5 in total, rose to their feet one by one, smirking as they cracked knuckles and rolled shoulders. Eli stayed seated, watching them, no fear, no anger, just a calm stillness that seemed impossible. The waitress, trembling, grabbed the phone behind the counter. "Don't," she started, but Blade cut her off with a glare. "Put it down," he barked, and she shrank back, helpless. "You've got 2 choices, pal." Blade turned back to Eli. "Walk out that door right now, or we take this outside." Eli didn't move, didn't blink. He set his coffee cup down, the sound almost inaudible. "I'd rather finish my lunch," he said simply. Blade grinned like he'd won something. "Fine, we'll do it here then." The bikers moved in closer, forming a half circle around the booth. They thought they had him trapped. They thought the numbers mattered. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The diner had become a stage, every person an unwilling audience member. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the clinking of utensils had stopped. The bikers loomed, their shadows stretching across Eli like threats, their collective smirk, a mask for their arrogance. Blade, eager to reclaim his pride after Eli's quiet defiance, cracked his knuckles and sneered. "Last chance, tough guy. Walk out now before we put you down." Eli stared at him, unblinking. There was no shift in his posture, no tensing of muscles. He looked almost bored, and that made Blade furious. "You just don't get it." Blade spat, and without warning, he lunged. The moment moved in slow motion for everyone else, but for Eli, it was instinct like breathing. Eli shifted, not a flinch, not a shuffle, but a precise move, practiced to perfection over countless drills and real-world encounters. He slid out of the booth in one fluid motion, grabbing Blade's wrist mid-swing, redirecting his force. The biker stumbled forward, caught off guard. Before he could react, Eli twisted Blade's arm behind his back, guiding him straight into the sturdy wooden table. A loud thud echoed through the diner as the biker's chest slammed into the laminate surface. "One down." The others hesitated, startled. Eli released Blade, letting him crumble to the floor, groaning. He turned toward the remaining 5, his eyes calm but firm. "You don't want this," he said softly, almost like advice. But bikers, especially ones like the Iron Fists, with an audience, don't back down. Not when their reputation, their entire identity is on the line. They were operating on misconceptions and arrogance, convinced that numbers and brute force were all that mattered. They profoundly underestimated the man in front of them, a man whose quiet demeanor and calm exterior masked years of elite training and a lifetime of facing down real threats. The wiry man with stringy hair was next, charging with a yell, fists swinging wild. Eli sidestepped him like water flowing around a rock, then planted a precise elbow into the man's gut. The biker wheezed, folding over, as Eli used his own momentum to send him sprawling into a chair, which collapsed under his weight. 2 down. The remaining 3 bikers moved together now, a sharp sense of panic replacing their bravado. This wasn't a bar fight. This was something else entirely. But it was too late. The largest of them, a mountain of a man, grabbed for Eli's shoulder, a mistake. Eli turned sharply, trapping the man's arm and dropping him to the floor with a clean sweep of his leg. Before the biker could react, Eli knelt, pressing a knee into his back, and whispered, "Stay down." The man froze, gasping for air, and didn't move. 3 down. Another came at Eli from behind, wielding a chair. The attack was sloppy, desperate. Eli ducked effortlessly, rising to grab the chair and yank it free from the biker's hands. The man stumbled back off balance, and Eli closed the distance. A controlled shove sent him reeling into a booth where he collapsed in a heap. 4 down. The last biker hesitated, eyes wide, hands trembling. He looked around at his friends, bruised, broken, humiliated. Then he looked at Eli, who hadn't even broken a sweat. Eli tilted his head slightly. A silent question. "You're done." The biker swallowed hard, then turned and bolted for the door, the bell above it jangling wildly as he fled into the parking lot. 5 down. The diner went utterly still. Eli exhaled, adjusting his baseball cap as he glanced at the mess. The bikers groaned from the floor, too shocked or winded to get up. Blade, still slumped over the table, looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Eli looked him in the eyes and said softly, "I told you to back off." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the sound of victory, but the profound quiet of absolute, undeniable control. For Eli, it wasn't about pride or showing off. It was simply about drawing a line, defending his right to exist peacefully, and demonstrating that true power isn't about making noise, but about making an impact that silences all noise. The most dangerous threats are often the quietest, and the most effective force is often the most controlled. The diner sat frozen. Nobody moved. The silence felt heavier than the fight itself. The waitress stood behind the counter, her hand still on the phone she never got the chance to use. The cook peeked through the kitchen window, eyes wide, his spatula hanging uselessly in his hand. Eli straightened up, his breathing steady, his posture relaxed. If you hadn't just witnessed the whirlwind of precise force, you'd think he'd simply finished tying his shoe. Blade groaned as he pushed himself halfway up, his bruised pride far worse than his aching ribs. "What the hell, who are you?" he muttered, his voice a mix of pain and confusion. Eli looked down at him, his face calm, unreadable. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat. "Just a guy getting lunch," he said quietly. Blade glared at him through bloodshot eyes. "You ain't normal. What the hell are you?" Eli looked around the diner. The eyes on him weren't filled with fear. They were filled with awe-respect. People weren't used to seeing someone that calm, that capable. The wiry biker, still slumped against a chair, coughed out, "You military or something?" Eli didn't answer directly. He turned away from them, heading back to his booth. His plate was still there, burger and fries, untouched, the coffee cup half full. He picked up a fry and took a bite, as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. The waitress finally moved, stepping forward cautiously, her voice shaky. "Sir, are you okay?" Eli looked up and gave her a soft smile. "I'm fine, ma'am." She blinked, stunned by how polite he sounded after what he'd just done. She glanced at the bikers sprawled across the floor, then back at him. I'll get you a fresh burger." "No need," Eli replied. "This one's just fine." A man sitting at the far booth, someone's grandfather with a farmer's tan and calloused hands, muttered, "I ain't never seen anything like that before." Eli ignored the whispers spreading through the room. He knew what they were thinking. A calm man in a world full of noise stands out. People remember that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them neatly under the edge of his plate. Then he rose from the booth, the sound of his boots the only noise in the room, as he walked toward the door. The waitress watched him go. "Wait," she called after him. "Who are you really?" Eli paused with his hand on the door. He glanced back at her, holding her gaze for just a second longer than expected. "Just a guy who knows how to finish his lunch," he said with a faint smile. Then he stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling faintly as it closed behind him. Outside, the gravel crunched under Eli's boots as he made his way back to his truck. The biker who had fled earlier stood near his motorcycle, staring at Eli in shock. He didn't say a word. He just stepped aside as Eli climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, the sound breaking the stillness that had gripped the parking lot. Eli put the truck in gear, glanced once in the rearview mirror at the diner, and the people still standing inside watching him leave. Then, he drove off down the empty road. The bikers would recover. Bruises would fade. But the lesson would stick. You don't judge a man by how he looks, how he talks, or where he comes from. Sometimes, the quiet ones are the ones you should never test. For Eli, this wasn't about seeking glory or recognition. It was simply about defending his right to peace, a principle forged in the crucible of his past. He wasn't just a tough guy. He was a protector, a silent guardian forged in the unforgiving crucible of the Navy SEALs, where the missions often had no fanfare, and the people he protected sometimes never even knew they needed protecting. For the people in that diner, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The small diner on a less traveled road would never be the same. Words spread quickly, a story like this one that people would tell their friends, their family, their co-workers. It grew with each retelling. Yeah, I was there, someone would say. The guy barely moved, took those bikers apart like he was tying his shoes. Didn't even break a sweat. He was calm the whole time, another would add, like he didn't even see them as a threat. The waitress told her version, 2 eyes wide, as she described the stranger's stillness, his precision. I asked him who he was, she'd say, and you know what he told me? Just a guy getting lunch. For the bikers, the lesson was even harder. The bruises would heal, but the humiliation lingered. Blade, the loudest of them all, was the quietest for weeks afterward. Every time someone teased him about the diner, he'd go red in the face and mutter, "Forget about it." But deep down, he wouldn't forget. None of them would. That day shattered their arrogance. It taught them that strength isn't in numbers or in how loud you are. Sometimes it's in knowing you can, but choosing not to until there's no other option. Eli, the man who simply wanted to finish his lunch, had left behind a legacy of quiet, unyielding respect. Somewhere down that lonely stretch of Highway 17, Eli Vance drove on the miles passing like whispers. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the vast Georgia sky in hues of orange and purple. He wasn't thinking about the diner anymore or the iron fists. To him, it was simple: you treat people with respect and you mind your business. And if someone crosses the line, you handle it not with anger, but with control. This philosophy wasn't born from a textbook. It was forged in the heat of countless unseen conflicts, in the quiet intensity of his time as a Navy SEAL. He thought about the missions no one would ever hear about the people he protected, even when they didn't know they needed protecting. That's what mattered to him. Not the noise, not the ego, just the job. As he drove, a tune played faintly on the old radio, the kind of song that makes the road feel endless and free. A few miles later, Eli pulled off to another small roadside spot, this time a gas station. He stepped out, stretched his legs, and grabbed a bottle of water from inside. The cashier, a teenage kid with headphones dangling around his neck, glanced up as Eli approached the counter. "You headed somewhere important?" the kid asked, making conversation oblivious to the silent force standing before him. Eli smiled faintly, tossing a few bills on the counter. "Nope, just passing through." The kid nodded his eyes, catching something in Eli's stance, a certain stillness, a quiet readiness. "You military or something?" he asked almost reflexively. Eli paused for half a second, a flicker of an old world crossing his features, then shrugged. "Just a guy getting water," he said, and stepped back outside, water in hand. He climbed into his truck, and as he pulled back onto the road, the cashier watched through the window, feeling something he couldn't quite describe. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. Eli Vance was gone again, another town, another stretch of road. He didn't need recognition. He didn't want it. He was not looking for fame or validation, but for everyone he left behind, his quiet strength spoke volumes. His story, even the parts they didn't fully grasp, was a powerful reminder you don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone through intimidation or aggression. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who let their actions do the talking. Respect isn't earned through loud words or bravado. It's earned through control, composure, and quiet strength. The people who seem the calmest are often the ones who fought the hardest battles unseen and unacknowledged. Never judge someone by what you think you see. Because beneath a calm exterior, there might just be a depth of experience and a reservoir of resilience that few can truly comprehend. It's a lesson that stays with you, a quiet force that changes perspectives one silent act at a time. If Eli's story resonated with you, if it stirred that spark of resilience within your own spirit, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this lesson, someone who's fighting their own quiet battles. And tell us in the comments below, what does quiet strength mean to you? How have you or someone you know faced adversity with unshakable resolve? Let's build a community of quiet warriors, reminding each other that sometimes the most powerful statements are made without a single word. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life.